Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm Rav, the Senior Fundraising Coordinator at BC Policy Solutions. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that our work takes place on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. It's been 9 months since BC Policy Solutions launched, and the support we've received in that time has meant so much to us. We are incredibly grateful for all of you. We hope to keep growing our community of supporters so we can continue this important work. If you'd like to make a donation, there'll be a link in the chat. Additionally, please help us spread the word. Tell your family, friends, and colleagues about us. Every new supporter makes a difference. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A function. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can during the Q&A portion. Again, thank you all so much. With that, I'll hand it over to Aglika.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar on AI, civil liberties, and your job. My name is Iglika Ivanova, and I am a long-term researcher, now co-executive director of BC Policy Solutions. BC Policy Solutions, as Rav mentioned, just opened up our doors 9 months ago. We're a new independent research institute, but we're launched by a group of people with decades of experience in public policy analysis and advocacy in this province. We develop and promote rigorous research to bring clarity to the pressing challenges of our time, and we offer bold solutions to improve life for workers, communities, and families across the province. Our work is grounded in principles of economic, social, racial, and environmental justice, and it's done collaboratively with organizations and advocates also working towards the same vision. I invite you all to visit our website, bcpolicy.ca, to take a look at our publications as well as recordings of previous webinars from our fall series. And now, it's my great pleasure to introduce the speakers for today's webinar. First, we'll hear from my colleague, Dr. Véronique Sioufi, BC Policy Solutions Racial Equity Researcher. Véronique recently successfully defended her PhD thesis titled Big Data Microwork, a labor geography of AI's invisible infrastructure workers in Canada and Tunisia. And she leads our work on the impacts of AI. Véronique is joined today by 2 guests, Ankita Goyal and Sarah Ryan. Ankita is the research lead at the Center for Civil Governance here in Vancouver, and also works as a research lead for Squamish Nation. The Center for Civic Governance has just put out a report that Ankita worked on, shining a light on the ways BC municipalities are already using AI in very concerning ways, and we'll hear more about that shortly. Also joining us is Sarah Ryan. Sarah is a senior research officer at the Canadian Union of Public Employees National Office in Ottawa. She coordinates CUPE National's working group on artificial intelligence, and she's been working for a few years now on this topic to equip workers for this new wave of technological change. I'm thrilled to pass it on to Véronique.
Thank you so much, Aglika. Let me get my presentation started. So, first of all, thank you all for being here on your lunch hour today to talk artificial intelligence, civil liberties, and work. I am Véronique Sioufi. As Aglika mentioned, I'm the racial equity researcher and policy analyst at BC Policy Solutions. And the reason you're hearing from me today is because my master's research was about how commercially motivated algorithms on social media shape what kinds of political organizing is possible. And as Aglika mentioned, my more recent PhD research was about the globally uneven economy of AI and the hidden labor behind artificial intelligence. So I've been studying algorithms, AI, and the data economy for the better part of a decade now, I guess. So my goal today is to strip away some of the hype that surrounds AI and ask a few grounded questions. What is this technology really? What kinds of social and economic forces are shaping it? And what might a community-driven approach to AI policy look like in response? Because AI is often presented as a neutral innovation, a scientific breakthrough that will improve efficiency and productivity. We're hearing AI is the future and we have to adapt or be left behind. So it's important to ask ourselves who is profiting from AI and at whose expense. And then after my presentation, I'll turn to Sarah and Ankita to guide us through some of the most pressing policy concerns regarding AI in the workplace and AI in municipal governance. And then we'll turn it over to the audience. So if you have any questions for us, please use the Q&A feature to ask them, and we'll have that Q&A session at the end. So let's start with what exactly is artificial intelligence. AI is a really broad term for a field of computer programming that aims to mimic human cognition. You can call it the science of making an intelligent machine. And there's not actually a clear consensus on the boundaries of what counts as intelligence in computers. If anything, though, there is a pretty strong consensus that no technology we currently have is truly intelligent in the human sense, despite all the anthropomorphic language we use around it. So one way AI gets defined is in this divide between general AI and narrow AI, with general AI really being that aspirational science fiction AI where machines have cognitive abilities to learn, understand, and apply knowledge across different domains. And I know it sure seems like the AI tools we're seeing today, like ChatGPT, can understand us and learn and teach, but it's actually a bit of an illusion and still technically falls under this category of narrow AI, of systems that are specialized to perform very specific tasks within a pre-programmed domain. So how is it that these programs work and that they're able to do such a good job sometimes of mimicking human cognition while not technically being intelligent? Essentially, the recipe is algorithms, data, and human labor. Algorithms are the instructions that tell computers what to do. And as I'm sure many of you know, algorithms are ancient, and computer algorithms even date back at least to, Ada Lovelace in the 19th century. Essentially, all computer programming is a set of algorithms. So that's not AI yet. Now, because so much of our activity is digitized, in the last few decades, in some way, we have huge and complex sets of data to deal with. So every click on your computer, on your phone, every purchase, your medical visits, your GPS tracked movement, it's a lot of information. We call this big data. And much of what we're labeling AI is essentially types of algorithms that try and make better sense of that data than a human could, or at least faster than a human could. So you may have heard of machine learning algorithms, deep learning, or generative AI. This all falls under the category of AI. These are ever more complex and honestly really impressive statistical correlation machines. But in other words, what they do is pattern matching. Over millions of iterations, these programs can associate certain inputs with certain outputs. For example, which pixels correspond to a face, or which words tend to follow others in a sentence. Even generative AI works in this way with prediction, by predicting the next word, pixel, or sound fragment based on patterns learned from these millions or even probably billions now of examples. So what looks like creativity or generation of something new is really the predictive recombination of prior human work on a massive scale. And so, of course, human labor is required at every step. We produce the data, and then a global army of underpaid workers have to classify the data that these programs are trained on. Somebody had to minutely tag and label every bit of sound, every image, every part of speech, for computers to know what they were, and then give feedback and correct those errors in an ongoing way. So this, machine learning is really the codifying of human knowledge. So looking at this process, data is extracted from human activity, organized by human labor, transformed by algorithms into statistical predictions, and deployed back into society in ways that do shape future behavior, which is then captured again. This helps us see AI not so much as an autonomous intelligence, but as an industrial process that turns human experience into a commercial resource. So it's not hard to see that if they're operating on pattern matching, that machine learning algorithms are going to reflect, reproduce, and even magnify the inequalities embedded in the data that they're processing. So what looks like accuracy in predictions is really in reality a statistical average, a generalization built from past patterns. But the process of turning social life into data is reductive and it's distortive. It strips away context and meaning, and it transforms human experience into these quantifiable fragments. So despite being presented as objective, data is actually never neutral. This goes for science too, but we'll just focus on AI for now. It carries the imprint of the social systems that it was collected out of. So inequality, exclusion, and bias are all going to be a part of that. This is a science built on correlation, not causation. And so more data does not necessarily mean more truth. In fact, as data sets get bigger and bigger, they often accumulate more noise, and that leads to misleading associations. AI systems then make assumptions and predictions based on data that was never really intended to represent real-world judgment. So financial institutions right now are making lending and insurance decisions using digital traces like social media activity or purchasing patterns that were never meant to measure creditworthiness. And under this logic of correlation, there are consequences both to being too visible in the data, too much data capture, but also to being invisible within it. So if we think of hypervisibility, we can think of something like predictive policing. Algorithms are trained on already racially biased arrest data, arrest records, and then they identify certain neighborhoods or individuals based on that data as high risk. This then is going to justify increased policing in those same areas, which is going to produce more arrest data and reinforce that original bias. It's a feedback loop that deepens racial discrimination rather than, preventing crime as it promises to do. But then on the other hand, invisibility in data can also lead to more neglect and harm. So if we think about in healthcare, for example, the underrepresentation of women, especially Indigenous, Black, and racialized women in existing medical research and diagnoses mean that AI diagnostic tools are going to be less able to detect their symptoms because of the absence of these bodies and experiences from data sets, which is going to translate again into worse health outcomes. So researchers have described this feedback loop as automated inequality or the new Jim Code. Despite all the hype, AI is actually not performing commercially as well as its promoters claim. So we're producing all of this bias kind of for nothing. Even as governments and investors pour billions into the field, many companies are struggling to make real profits off of AI. One widely publicized MIT study, which you may have seen recently, claimed that about 95% of AI pilot projects fail to become profitable, 95%. And this is for a number of reasons. The reality is that large-scale AI systems are enormously expensive to build, train, and operate, and they consume staggering amounts of energy and water. Running them requires constant updates, maintenance, and human supervision. So they're actually not that efficient. They're quite clumsy still, even at basic tasks like writing coherent code or handling customer service interactions. Developers have had to admit that models hallucinate, as they call it. There's logic errors. They have a limited context window, which means that their outputs frequently ignore like really crucial information. So it's a little scary to me that in our rush to push AI, we're likely coding some serious errors into essential digital services as we speak. And that's not to mention, all the publishing and circulating of AI slop and misinformation that's happening right now. AI has been so ineffective, expensive, or difficult that some companies that claimed to be using AI were actually using human labor all along because it was cheaper and easier. You may have heard the story of Amazon's Just Walk Out. This was marketed as a revolutionary cashierless shopping experience using computer vision and AI to automatically detect what customers picked up and bill them. No checkout required. So that's the Just Walk Out. But it was actually 1,000 or so workers in India watching the cameras because they just couldn't get AI to work. And so for all these reasons, we're seeing companies that were once big boosters of AI quietly rehiring a human workforce. So you can think of like Klarna. They went from claiming that a chatbot could do the work of 700 employees to within months having to hire humans back because the service quality just went down the drain so quickly. People were complaining about getting stuck in Kafka-esque loops, which I'm sure everybody's experienced. But the thing about hiring these workers back is that workers are getting hired back actually to assist AI. AI is not getting thrown out altogether. So behind the scenes, armies of human workers are continuing to edit, correct, and reformat AI outputs. So instead of replacing human labor, AI is reorganizing work into more repetitive, underpaid, and precarious work. So we can start to see from this that the real business of AI is a little different than we thought. It's about the threat of automation. The threat of automation has always been used to reduce wages and bargaining power. When workers are told they're replaceable by machines, they're more likely to accept worse conditions, longer hours, lower pay. We've seen this dynamic repeatedly. You know, I think it was just last year, if not this year, I think last year, Microsoft, for example, announced major layoffs under the banner of AI transformation, but then they were simultaneously hiring new workers through the H-1B visa program, essentially replacing stable jobs with cheaper, more compliant labor while contributing to the narrative that people are losing their jobs to AI. And even when AI doesn't work well, it still works as discipline. It sets new standards for what a single worker is expected to do, so intensifying work, and particularly if you ignore quality for quantity. It's also a powerful tool for surveillance and management because accuracy doesn't really matter to employers if workers are the ones bearing the consequences when the system fails. At the same time, every time we use these tools at work, we're generating the data that trains and improves them. So the more we adopt AI in our workplaces, even if it's ineffective right now and inefficient, the more we're training AI to de-skill and displace us. So we end up in this inverse situation where instead of these tools being to assist us at our jobs will be to assist these tools. Now, we're watching a lot of startups and companies experiment with what AI can do, but underneath is a decades-long process of vertically integrating the entire digital infrastructure. And by that, I mean that there are a handful of tech giants, and you know their names. This is like Meta, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, that own everything. And I mean everything, like from the deep sea cables to the data centers, to the apps and platforms we use, the AI models, the cloud computing power, and of course, all of the data that flows through this entire stack. And they're even invested in the energy sector because this tech is such a drain on energy. The AI hype is not only putting downward pressure on wages, but it's also helping these companies to expand their infrastructure at really minimal costs, thanks to subsidies and the AI gold rush. So they've been allowed to entrench a rentier economic model where all other businesses and social systems, you know, from healthcare systems to police departments to governments to AI startups, have to pay these gatekeepers for access to computing power, to data storage, and to algorithmic capabilities that they now control. So we're seeing AI pilots rise and fall, but this small, you know, we can call it an oligopoly, is making money either way. The result is a concentration of economic power that I think is really unprecedented even in modern capitalism. And while advertising revenue built the initial tech monopolies, I think the most profitable and strategically significant revenue streams for these giants have shifted decisively towards military surveillance and policing contracts. So with companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, just to name a few, they're operating a like three-layered profit model here, where one, they collect data on billions of users through consumer platforms. Two, they provide the cloud infrastructure that processes surveillance operations. And then they develop specialized AI tools for security agencies and military. And then they've got companies like Palantir that functions as a kind of integration layer that runs on their infrastructure to unify fragmented government databases with the data from the tech platforms, creating a kind of symbiotic ecosystem where all parties are profiting from the same surveillance apparatus. So they sell these infrastructures and AI tools and capabilities to the Pentagon, to ICE, to the RCMP, to the IDF, and these groups are in turn field testing and refining the technology for them. So that tiny oligopoly has the technical capacity and impunity to monitor, analyze, and weaponize every dimension of human existence in the service of capital accumulation, of state violence, and of social control. So right now is a particularly important moment for us to intervene in the AI policy landscape, and particularly in Canada, because it's not much of a landscape. We're kind of operating in a policy vacuum at the moment. It's been the AI Wild West in Canada for years, actually. So Canada's foundational privacy law, the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, PIPEDA, dates back to 2000, okay? The era of websites and emails and nothing else. Attempts to modernize it, like the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, failed to address the core issue that, the consent-based models we're working on right now, they don't protect citizens because saying no means being excluded from modern life, if you're going to say no. And that's, again, if you're going to read these end user agreements that we all kind of just click agree to. In 2022, the federal government introduced the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act under Bill C-27, and this was presented as part of Canada's digital charter meant to regulate high-impact AI systems. It lacked meaningful definitions, there wasn't clear enforcement mechanisms, and there weren't really very good public interest safeguards, but it doesn't matter because that bill died anyway, so we have no active AI legislation really. Now, this year, we've seen the introduction of an AI minister of sorts, both federally and provincially in BC. And both are claiming to balance innovation with ethics, but their mandates do seem to focus on commercialization and public-private partnerships rather than on rights protections. And most recently, like happening right now, actually, Ottawa launched an AI task force, a 1-month public consultation process. Digital rights groups have criticized this sprint, as they're calling it, as industry-driven, kind of replacing democratic deliberation with corporate co-drafting, as they call it. So at the same time as this rush is happening, this corporate-driven rush, I would say, other federal bills are moving kind of in the opposite direction of protection. So we've got bills C2 and C8 that are expanding surveillance and cross-agency data sharing. We've got Bill C9, which is introducing new online speech controls and limitations on protesting. And then Bill C12 is meant to strengthen deportation, but it's got a lot of like border data measures. So together they signal a consolidation of surveillance and policing powers based on these technologies with no really coherent public policy to govern them. Kind of terrifying to me. But if we accept that AI is not an inevitable force, but a political project, then alternative policies do become possible. So a social good approach to AI would definitely begin by asking, what forms of collective ownership and democratic control could ensure that technology serves social needs rather than capital accumulation. So underneath it all, we want public data infrastructures. Those need to be reclaimed. Data collected through public institutions, schools, hospitals, social services should not flow into private training sets. Data governance should be transparent, rooted in collective rights, collective consent, rather than that kind of individual transaction approach. And publicly funded AI research should be directed towards socially beneficial applications, not commercial partnerships. And both, we both need strong privacy protections, but also strong labor protections are essential. And we'll talk more shortly with Sarah Ryan about what kind of protections workers need from AI in the workplace. Democratic oversight has to extend to all uses of AI in government and social services. Algorithmic decision making in health, welfare, policing, or immigration, at the very least, need, meaningful accountability mechanisms. And then finally, if we take a broader picture, technological policy should be understood as part of our bigger economic strategy. So the resources currently funneled into speculative AI projects could instead support sectors that directly improve quality of life, like healthcare, education, climate adaptation, housing. But what I'm trying to get at is that the choice is not between embracing or rejecting AI, but between surrendering to its current internal logics and privatized infrastructure, or reshaping it for collective benefit. Technology has always been a terrain of struggle, but the more we treat AI as inevitable, the more we kind of foreclose the possibility of building a society where human skill and creativity and collective capacity come first. So I'll leave it there for now because I have some questions from my fellow panelists that I think they're going to do a great job of answering. So let me start with you, Ankita. Ankita, just to remind folks, is the research coordinator at the Center for Civic Governance, and you've just put out a report on AI in municipal governance. So maybe I'll start with asking, how did this research on AI come about? What made the Center for Civic Governance decide to tackle AI?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and for the amazing background on AI. I've honestly been looking forward to this conversation because I think AI is one of those topics that's everyone thinking and talking about right now, but not many people really feel sure about. So, for those who don't know us, the Center for Civic Governance, or CCG, is an independent public policy think tank based here in BC. Our work is all about supporting progressive local leadership, including but not limited to mayors, councillors, school trustees, and regional directors. So, a big part of what we do is take a lot of big, complicated, sometimes intimidating topics and make them practical and usable for local governments. And that's really how this work began on AI. So, basically, the research actually started taking shape before some of our newer projects, which I'll talk about in a second. And it's been over a year in the making. Every time we thought we are done, there'd be a new headline, a new policy, or a new tool. But I think that's the part of all of it what made it so exciting. Now, around the same time last year in 2024, we were also working on the Inspire project, which basically looks at systemic racism and online harms faced by racialized local electeds across BC. And that's something we've been leading with the Foundation for Path Forward and is being funded by Law Foundation BC. So, what's interesting is that AI wasn't even part of the project at all. But as we started holding events and interviews through Inspire, it kept coming up on its own. Local electeds would um, talk about online hate, misinformation, or how digital spaces were affecting their work. And then someone would say, and now there's AI. Should we be worried about that? We sort of started noticing this pattern. Even though it wasn't the focus of Inspire, these conversations revealed that it's very, very timely and that a lot of local leaders were curious about AI. They wanted to engage with it, but I think they didn't always feel confident or equipped to do so. So the gap between curiosity and confidence was very, very evident. Um, During the interviews and the events, people would say, I keep hearing about AI, but I don't really know where to start, or what does this mean for my city or my community? And that really stuck with us because we realized that AI is already shaping how information spreads, how decisions are made, and like you said, even who gets heard. That's how this research evolved, basically. We developed three main pieces: a main report, which basically looks at how AI is showing up in municipal governance across BC, and some case studies from North America, a primer that basically breaks down things in practical terms and includes only examples from Canada, and a resources document which sort of acts like a life toolkit with policies and frameworks that local governments can actually use. So I think at the end of the day, the specific research and the project is and was about empowerment. It was about giving local electeds basically the language, the awareness, and the confidence to lead responsibly in the space. I hope this makes sense.
That's some great work, and I really recommend folks check out those resources. Okay, so after doing this research, what have you found? Like, why should AI be a priority issue for local elected officials right now? What risks does it bring or opportunities to municipal decision making?
Right. That's a great question. Honestly, one that I think every local leader is trying to wrap their heads around right now. So, when we started looking at all these examples, one thing became very, very clear that AI isn't something that we thought was a distant future. It's already here. It's already shaping how local governments operate today in really, really practical ways. So, according to MNP's report, that is AI in Action, it's actually a fascinating and extensive read. It basically said that about 23% of Canadian municipalities are already using AI, and more than half are actively exploring it. So, even if a council in a municipality hasn't formally adopted AI, chances are it's still already in use somewhere, maybe through permitting software, maybe through automated chatbots or data analytics that help guide their planning decisions. So I think that's exactly why it is a priority issue, because AI is quietly influencing municipal decision making and in ways that touch residents and our lives every single day. But I won't lie, opportunities are also huge. For instance, AI can help local governments become more efficient, responsive, and data driven. One example that I love is BC's COVID virtual assistant, which handled around 1.75 million inquiries from nearly a million residents. That basically freed up staff to focus on people cases and something that needed human attention the most. And even one case that I researched about was from Barcelona's irrigation system, which basically used AI to water city parks based on weather data. So yes, there are some real tangible benefits that show that how AI can serve communities, but there's always a but when we talk about AI, right? The flip side is just as real. These systems, like you said, are only as fair as the data they are trained on. If the data carries bias, the AI will too. For instance, like you said, cities like Oakland and Santa Cruz in the States actually banned predictive policing tools after realizing they were reinforcing racial bias instead of reducing it. And even here in BC, privacy commissioner has warned us time and again about AI in public systems, that public systems need to be transparent and carefully governed. And then this issue of trust. If residents basically don't understand how decisions are being made, if they hear that algorithm denied their application or prioritized one project over the other, it can really erode confidence in local government. That's why some cities internationally, like Amsterdam, have started publishing public algorithm registers. Basically, a public algorithm register is an online list or database where local government discloses which algorithms or AI systems it uses for public decision making. So, and I think all of it just connects back to what we saw in our Inspire project on online harms and misinformation, because generative AI has made it so much easier than to than ever to produce false or misleading content, sometimes even targeting local councils and policy debates. For instance, just in this year, August, the BC Wildfire Service had to publicly warn residents about AI generated fake images circulating during the wildfire season, which was confusing. What matters, I think, being in this AI space right now is just being curious, asking right questions, and insisting on transparency. Because honestly, the technology that we are dealing with might be complex, but the values guiding it don't have to be that complex, I think. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it definitely does. Thank you so much, Ankita. Sarah, maybe I'll take it to you. And just to remind folks, Sarah is the Senior Research Officer at CUPE and expert on all things AI in the workplace. So what are, if you can speak on behalf of unions, what are unions concerned about with AI?
Um, I mean, it's interesting. It's a bit tricky just because there's a lot of different AI applications that can be implemented in the workplace. So we've kind of broken it down into like four major kind of buckets of concern, of risk for workers. One would be automation. So you can have task automation or job automation. So this is where an AI system would do work that was previously done by a human. And this can lead to job restructuring or job loss. And we have started to see in certain sectors CUPE members, particularly in communications and healthcare, losing jobs as a result of AI automation. A second concern that we would have is around surveillance and monitoring in the workplace. Veronique was mentioning that these tools can they can hype up surveillance into like really invasive ways, right? There are tools called bossware that, keystroke monitoring, videotaping workers, computer activity trackers, but also like biometric and wearable technology that really gets into workers' bodies, right? So all of this would be to track workers' productivity, to track their physical location, as well as their behavior. And then this can be funneled into our third concern, which would be like algorithmic management tools. And it's where that surveillance data gets funneled through an algorithm to make predictions or decisions about workers. So this would be like where, the robot becomes your boss, right? Things that your managers used to do, like hire a worker or discipline or terminate a worker or set a schedule or assign tasks are done through an algorithm. And this can have an impact on workers because we had some workers recently, CUPE members, talking about how their jobs, their tasks are now assigned through an app on a phone, so, and there's a certain amount of time that's allocated to do that particular task. And if they end up taking too much time to perform that task, they will get pulled in for discipline. And maybe what happened is they're getting pulled aside by a coworker who needs some help, or by a public service user who is asking a question and needs some support. And apparently you need to flag your boss and let them know, oh, this is why this task is taking a bit too long, according to the app and the algorithm. So it can have some real impacts on a worker's autonomy in the workplace, and as well as like potential discipline. And this is also linked, all of these tools are linked to bias and discrimination, as Veronique was discussing. It's all this data is getting processed. There's bias and discrimination in our world, in our data sets. The algorithms can be biased and discriminatory. So, one example would be, an Amazon hiring tool that was resulting in hiring men, is discriminating against women being hired. So this can have a real impact on equity deserving workers as well.
And what are you, what is CUPE doing about this, the rise of AI in the workplace?
Well, our first step was to start producing resources for our members. So on the website that was put in the chat, there's a guide to understanding AI, which kind of breaks down AI in an understandable way for workers. We also have some template collective bargaining language that locals can incorporate into their collective agreements. So that's another way we're trying to kind of minimize the risks, because what we say is, these systems really depend on how they're used, right? they can be used in positive ways that make work better, or they can be used in ways that deteriorate working conditions or result in job loss. And so we want to see like the high road. We want to see employers taking the high road, and we want to minimize the risk to workers through collective bargaining language. We've also just been doing a lot of education, a lot of talking to workers about what these systems are, how to actually spot it, because sometimes, you know, you don't even, I think people don't even realize that their workplace is changing, and it's through having the conversations to talk about the impact and look at it. Like, is this making our work lives better, or is it making our work lives worse, right? Because there's a lot more data collection about workers as well, like in every aspect of their day, that can be used in who knows what way. You know, right now, I think workers often have no idea, right? They don't know what data is being collected by their employer. They don't know how that data is being used. They don't know like that tech systems are being implemented. Like, you know, there's no requirement, you know, around transparency. And we've definitely heard that workers are very surprised when they find out, you know, that these systems have been put in place.
So what kind of policies are you looking to implement in collective agreements to protect workers from this kind of thing? Or inform
I mean,
them?
yeah, for sure. I mean, the kind of the base of all of this is that workers need to know, they need to be informed, there needs to be transparency in the data that's being collected and in the tech systems that are affecting workers in the workplace. So that's kind of like the base level that everything else is built upon. And then we have some language around banning high risk systems. So there's a lot of AI now that, you know, like we're hearing about like biometric data being collected just like where a swipe card used to be used, right? And it's kind of like, you know, your employer doesn't need to collect that type of data about you to do something, like to enter a building, right? It's like folks aren't really thinking about the ramifications, but we're also seeing, you know, workers' data being compromised in, you know, cybersecurity breaches left, right, and center as well, right? Um, so like we have some language around banning, you know, biometric data collection, facial recognition data being collected, as well as emotion recognition systems in the workplace. And then we have protections around surveillance and monitoring. So putting some guardrails around, you know, what data can be collected and for what purpose, as well as like updating all of our, you know, core collective agreement language around layoff and recall, technological change, bias and discrimination, health and safety, because technology can impact workers in so many different ways, right?
Thank you so much, Sarah. Well, I think what I'll do is save our last 15 minutes we've got here to open it up to the audience. So, Amanda, do the folks listening in today happen to have any questions for any of us?
There are no questions about AI. We have a very active group today. Thank you to our panel for your wonderful presentations. I'm going to start with a question that I'll pose to each of you, just kind of across the board. There's a lot of concerns, but if you could implement one AI policy tomorrow, be it federal, provincial, or even just an organizational level, what would it be and why? And I'll let you decide what level it would be at, but yeah.
Well, maybe we'll work backwards to take the pressure off of me. I'm gonna throw this to Sarah, since you were just talking about some of the policies you'd like to see for workers. So where would you start with this?
I mean, I think one of the issues that is a bit trickier and that combines a lot of the issues in the workplace is algorithmic management, because it's where all this data is being collected, and you have almost like automated decisions in certain sectors as well being made by the technology that affects workers, right? And, you know, like even, you know, you have like wage setting, right, based on algorithms in certain sectors, as well as price setting for the public. So, I mean, I think there just really needs to be guardrails around like what these algorithms can be used for, and if they're affecting humans in real ways, like whether you get hired, whether you get fired, like your rate of pay, outside of the workplace, like, you know, how, I mean, is it fair that all this data is being collected about people even who are purchasing something like wage, like price setting, right? I mean, we just need like rules around how algorithms can be used. And I think when you're getting to automated decisions, when decisions are being automated through these machines, because that has a huge impact on public service delivery potentially as well, right? So your benefits shouldn't be decided whether you access like, you know, income support or employment insurance, or whether you're targeted for a fraud investigation, shouldn't be through an automated system. Like those things have a huge impact on humans. And I think there need to be guardrails put in place around that.
Yeah, and I'd say, you know, for there to be guardrails, we kind of need some transparency, which can be a really tricky and very broad term, because a lot of these systems are black box. You know, as we're working towards agential AI, as they're starting to call it, you know, part of the design is that it can make decisions without oversight, and they don't really know how those decisions get made. So even just knowing, you know, being mandated to be clear about, kind of like you were mentioning, Ankita, the lists of algorithms that are being used and in what places and for what purpose, even if the way they operate is black boxed. But I'll pass it to you, Ankita.
No, definitely. I think I couldn't agree more. Putting real guardrails in place is very, very important. So the federal government's algorithmic impact assessment, or AIA, is now a mandate for all the federal AI tools. It's such a useful framework that a lot of municipalities and everyone can adopt voluntarily. So basically, it includes 65 risk and 41 mitigation questions to make sure that the systems are transparent. So something like this can be adopted by various municipalities and organizations, even voluntarily, before launching any, I think, AI pilot program is very important. And then I think community engagement is very important. You know, AI shouldn't be something that just happens behind closed doors. We are all concerned about it. But when it is used in sensitive areas like housing, policing, and hiring, even, everyone deserves to be a part of that conversation. So I feel like community engagement is an integral part of the conversation as well. How about you, Ron? What do you think? What is one policy?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, transparency, but probably enforcement. You know, it's one of the problems we've had with past efforts at AI policy, which, you know, died, as we said, was a lack of enforcement. So, you know, if we want transparency and guardrails, I think, you know, moving past the voluntary adoption of these practices would be great. What about yeah, back to you, Amanda.
For sure. Lots more questions coming in. I am not an AI that's able to aggregate quickly, so I'll do my best. Um, can't replace me yet. Um, I'm curious about, and Kita, you kind of mentioned this a little bit. There's a question around, are there any international examples of AI governance that BC and Canada could look to, or maybe try to replicate examples of things that are working, or is everyone playing catch up right now?
Oh, definitely. I think it all circles back to what I was saying about public algorithm registers being more transparent. And I think that is something that has been working out. Honestly, I can't say for a lot of softwares that are being adopted because we don't know if it'll be successful or not because it's still in making, right? But I definitely think that public algorithm registers is something that every organization and every municipality can just adopt. And it's not that much of a work. It's simple but powerful transparency tool that helps build resident trust. But I think I don't have a lot of successful examples. But definitely, if you use AI as a tool in terms of answering to questions and chatbots and whatnot, then definitely it can be helpful, but then we have to be wary of all the biases it'll carry. So it's a complicated situation right now everywhere, I will say.
I think I could
Anyone else
jump
have
in.
any? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can jump in on that. I mean, we're very behind. The EU has probably the broadest kind of regulations around AI, and it's really focused on data privacy and data sovereignty. So keeping the kind of like chain of command of that data within the EU, which I think is what we're looking to do next here in Canada. And I think that's an important move. Still kind of light on the labor protection side of things, but it is something that they do pay attention to. So we can start to use that as a model, even though it's got some gaps to it. I think even just matching where the EU is at with that is great. Some of the concerns around just focusing on that data sovereignty thing is, like I said, the way in which the whole stack, that whole infrastructure has been privatized means that we can't really get control of all of the data that passes through it, even if we move the data centers to Canada. So it's still not quite everything we need.
Thank you. I'm gonna shift. We're running out of time, so I'm not gonna get to everyone's questions. There are a lot of questions from individuals in terms of individual workers being able to protect themselves. And Sarah, I think you covered a lot of that, and there's the materials provided. So I might leave those for now, and folks can reach out more about that info. But I am gonna bring up kind of the question that comes out of all of our webinars. Is what can advocacy groups and concerned citizens do right now to help influence this AI policy?
Well, I think definitely organizing in the workplace is a good place to start. Probably check, maybe I'll pass this to you, Sarah, but since most of us have to work for a living, what's the first thing we can do at work?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, we've really been focusing on workers' collective agreements because that is where, like, if you're part of a union, that's where we have the most control to be able to bring forward demands to our employer to negotiate collective agreement protections. One thing I would say, though, is that to get there, I think there needs to be a lot of education of workers around what's going on in the workplace and the impact of technology, because not everyone realizes right away what the impact is. And like a lot of this, the protections are fairly novel in terms of collective agreement language. And so unions are starting to table protections for workers when it comes to AI, but there haven't been huge gains yet. And except outside of like ACTRA and the creative industries are like ahead on this because there has been such huge risk in terms of immediate risk in terms of their jobs, and they have made huge gains when it comes to like consent compensation, when it comes to their image being used by production companies and that kind of thing. But I would say like organizing, mobilizing, talking, educating, and putting forward language to protect workers is a great start.
Yeah, if I can just jump in on that, that's exactly where I was going. Peer learning really goes a long way here. I feel like the key is to start small, build awareness internally, share resources, and collaborate. Because groups like UBCM, they already have communities of practice around AI and even introductory AI governance training. So I feel like peer learning definitely can go a long way.
Yeah, and I would just add, do it with a bit of a critical eye. We're up against so much hype. I have like the AI flag on my news app to aggregate the news around AI. It's very positive, it's very much this is inevitable. This is going to make all our lives better. Any workplace, especially in government, any government operation can be improved with the efficiency that AI has to offer. So, if you take anything away from today, would be to question whether that is true, not both in the short term and in the long run. And so that's where, that the education and peer-to-peer education is really good, because it is, it's good to ask ourselves who's really benefiting, and are we going to benefit and get better services out of this? Is the quality of the service going to be good? And yeah, that's not a bad place to start.
Thank you. I'm going to squeeze one last question in there because this has come up from a few different folks. Folks have heard a lot about the term ethical AI, which has become a little bit of a buzzword. And so there is questions around, what is ethical AI? Does it exist? Are there models, or what would that look like?
I mean, it's where are you starting from? Like starting from today, any AI model you're building is built on stolen labor already. So and it's already very resource extractive. It's terrible for the environment. It's not something I really covered in the talk a lot, but like you could do a whole webinar on how damaging to the environment it is. And so that question of like, do the benefits outweigh the costs? Like, it's the same old kind of fossil fuel questions that we already deal with and know. So where would you be starting from? You'd kind of have to start and build the system from scratch. What infrastructure are you working with? Who owns the infrastructure? If you're talking about using the cloud, like those are the same companies. We don't have the computing power. The computing power is owned by a handful of companies. So anything we do on that computing power, like you are in business essentially with the IDF, with the Pentagon, with ICE. Like these are, we're paying money to the same companies that are making money off of, the genocide in Palestine right now. So I don't know where you'd have to really start from scratch to build an ethical AI. You can't start from the systems or infrastructure or tools that are on offer today.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're really talking about how technology aligns with human values, right? Things like fairness, transparency, and respect for privacy. I think it's less about the coding part of it, but more about intent and the impact AI has. But I think one thing that is really helpful here in BC is BC's responsible use of AI principles, which basically focuses on 6 core ideas, the same that we were talking about. So I think in simple terms, ethical AI could mean just asking, can we use this? Should we use this? Or who could be harmed if we do? Just simple questions could make a difference, I think.
Yeah, at CUPE we've been calling for a public AI stack, to build the entire infrastructure in the public interest. That is, like the use cases are developed from the ground up, from the communities and around like making lives better, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. We are at time. That is not the end of the questions, but I'm sensing that this might be a topic we want to cover again. There are many different avenues to explore with AI, but I want to say thank you to our panelists for joining us today and lending your expertise. Direct folks to the resources shared in the chat. If you like these webinars and have attended and are able to, we appreciate your support so we can keep things like this going to keep people informed on how they can help. And our next webinar upcoming is on November 19th, where Iglika, my co-executive director, will be presenting with Anastasia French from the Living Wage BC on the 2025 Living Wage Report. So looking at what's changed from last year, if you're curious to know how living wage is calculated, why it's different from minimum wage, what benefits there are to becoming an employer that institutes living wage, this is going to be a great way to connect. So that's November 19th. We hope you can join us then. And with that, thank you to everyone for joining us, and another big thanks to our expert panel today. It was really great hearing from you all.